Live reaction to the Cowboys' victory over the New York Giants on Thursday Night Football, 20-15. My goodness, you're kind of in my position watching that final few seconds of the game, wondering what in the world is Mike McCarthy thinking in that position at that spot in the field with the clock situation, kicking the field goal. Even if it is kicked, the benefit of doing so does not outweigh what the potential negative was there in the fact that the Giants even had a chance to come back. I don't know in what world the kick at the end of the game makes sense. I know there were significant betting implications that were tied into that decision, but my goodness, to go forward and make that field goal decision in that scenario where the Giants have no timeouts and you're putting Aubrey out there as good as he's been for a 52-plus yard field goal. An absolute head scratcher at the end of the game there for Dallas that did not end up costing them, obviously, but to give Daniel Jones and the Giants a chance to operate just shy of the 50-yard line, just a baffling decision there at the end of the game. Doesn't end up costing the Cowboys, potentially ends up costing folks who took the 5.5, but that's kind of my big takeaway in a league that continues to see games be just very tight with these markets and see a lot of back and forth two-way action. That was a game that I thought clearly was faked down early in the week for a position to be taking on the Cowboys at -4. I talked about in the preview podcast on Wednesday morning how wrote the game up at 4.5. We saw the number move back, and it was a game that was locked in at 5 and 5.5 the entire week. And that was a game for 4 quarters that was sitting right on 5 as well for the majority of the game, just how it played out. These numbers are very tight. It's a third consecutive Thursday Night Football game that stays under the total. It's the third consecutive divisional matchup on Thursday Night Football that stays under the total. These Thursday games are trending very low, and everything's just very, very tight in these games. So if we take a step back here and go a little big picture, I think, first of all, believe it or not, this was the first ever short week road game for the Dallas Cowboys in franchise history. It's never happened. They have never gone on the road on a short week scenario to play a Thursday game ever. They have the Thursday Thanksgiving game, but they have been omitted the, I guess, unfortunate responsibility of playing on the road on a short week for the long storied franchise history of the Cowboys. I thought we saw them in many ways unprepared for this game, and quite frankly, pretty fortunate to get out with the victory. And I say that in the sense that I don't know what goes on with the medical staff, but there were guys going down left and right. And that's not unusual for a Thursday game. That happens often. But I feel like the spot really affected the Cowboys team on both sides. Defense, I don't know how many guys ended up going down. I lost count at halftime. There were 4 starters that were hurt. The injury news with Lawrence carried over into the second half. We saw Diggs have to leave. There's other guys I'm missing, but it felt like every other play there was somebody down for the Cowboys. So they handled this travel spot very poorly. And I think it's a reflection overall of just the coaching staff and what we have with this Cowboys team. And I know I'm talking kind of negative about them here in a 20-15 win, but that game should have been a lot bigger. And I'm not pointing to like a misleading box score in this scenario. I'm just watching the Cowboys offense operate for 4 quarters and just, I can't help but ignore how limited they were by the play calling and by some of the decision making. And in general, there's just not a lot there outside of CeeDee Lamb. But these third down runs and screen passes to fullbacks out of the backfield, 10 yards short of the chains in 2 consecutive series, we saw fullbacks involved on third down and long that were not converted. In the scenario where it was 1st and 19, you had a CeeDee Lamb run. You had another run on 2nd and very long. You had another pass to a fullback on third down. There, to me, was so much opportunity with injured Giants players in the secondary that the Cowboys picked and choose spots to exploit, but keep pressing that angle all game long, and they went away from it. And to me, it's a bigger reflection on McCarthy as a play caller to not be able to get more than 20 points in this game where there were certainly advantages downfield for the Giants to exploit. And so that was just what I thought was a limiting factor. Now, on the other side, it was kind of the inverse. I think back to week 1 where the Lions and Rams played on Sunday Night Football, and we saw McVay essentially down to Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp as two offensive weapons that he had to utilize and scheme open. I thought Brian Daboll tonight did a fantastic job of using Malik Neighbors in creative ways. He didn't quite get to 21 targets like Cooper Kupp did. It was close, but finding creative ways to get him open and do whatever he can scheme-wise, pre-snap-wise to find him space off of Diggs somewhere in the secondary, and it worked well for the Giants. The problem was when you're comparing Brian Daboll and Daniel Jones and Malik Neighbors, as good as they were tonight, and you're comparing that with the Rams and Sean McVay and Cooper Kupp, the Rams were turning those big plays into touchdowns. The Giants were turning this creativity and some of the big plays they were able to generate into like just barely making it into field goal range. And there was nothing sustained on the ground in a competitive game where we've seen the Cowboys really opened up. The Giants run for just 1.1 yards per carry. And it seemed at times like that was a bit of an afterthought for the Giants, which I thought was a mistake. And so it was just a Giants offense that, despite a lot of creativity and despite a lot of good play calling and despite a lot of good play design, you just see the limitations of the team unable to overcome it and get anything into the end zone when they needed it. And they certainly had opportunities, I thought, in the third quarter where they could flip the game and potentially come out with a lead and put some pressure on Dallas. And the Cowboys and their ineffective play calling just kind of got to overcome it and coast into this victory, which they kind of give opportunities to the Giants to come back and potentially get the win there and force them to do something in the third quarter. And it just never happened because the Giants couldn't get it into the end zone. So a bit of a weird game in terms of just stats to take away. 55% series success rate for the Cowboys when they started things with a run. Their running game all night was very inconsistent. That was padded a little bit by a couple of the late drives, specifically on the final drive there. We're able to pick up the first down, boosted that number up, but that was still like 20th percentile for rushing series success rate when you're looking at that as a first down play. And so that's just a reflection, despite a pretty decently functioning offensive line so far, of more so that Giants defensive front and how good it is. And then I thought Prescott played relatively well. That big play to Lamb pads things, certainly. But it was, again, like every time that we saw Shane Bowen for the Giants, the defensive play caller, dial up any blitz, Prescott was very effective at targeting it. And we don't have the official numbers, but they ran a montage like early mid-third quarter of plays from the first half where Prescott was pressured and they showed him picking it up and how effective he is off the blitz. And that was really something that the Giants utilized against Cleveland and that offensive line that was banged up to really get home, and they found defensive success. And tonight, every time they tried it, I felt like Prescott exploited it very well. But that's to be expected. That's what he does. And so in those spots, thought he looked very comfortable. And despite some of the inefficient play calling, he just overcame it with his expertise at the line and in the pocket when things are coming at the offensive line with extra guys. He handled that very well, as he always does. And so I think we see the Giants defense week to week just really dependent on the offensive lines they face, on how high they turn up that blitz percentage. And tonight it felt like it was a lot lower than weeks past. So that was probably the right call. But the couple times that I did feel like it was dialed up, I thought the Cowboys handled it well. And the big play to Lamb was off of an extra blitzer that came, and they rotated the safeties over. And it was effectively one-on-one outside with a single high safety because the other safety dropped in, and they found Lamb on that, which is just that play and that defensive design is just tailor-made for Prescott to have success. And he always does against those looks, as do a lot of QBs. But Prescott's just elite at finding those looks. And so it didn't feel like the Giants went back to that much after that blown play. And so that's something to watch for in the Giants defense, because if they're not aggressive like they were against Cleveland, we see this soft bend but don't break mentality that they employ. And for the majority of the game, the Cowboys were just walking the ball up and down the field with pretty bad play calling all around. See a couple comments from Gerard. He says, good evening, Adam. Good evening to you as well. Daniel Jones is horrible. He can't hit a deep throw. So that was an interesting thing too. He had, I want to say to the left side, probably 2 or 3 in the first half And in the second half, there was just nothing. And there wasn't even, taking away the final few plays of the game in Hail Mary scenarios, there wasn't really any attempt to push things downfield too as it got later. So I don't know what's going on there. That was different, especially given the circumstance. But I disagree with the horrible take in the context of this game specifically. I thought what Daboll had him doing with some of the screen passes, with how he was motioning Neighbors to find him advantages and get him open, and some of the outlets that he was hitting at times, I thought they did very well. On a couple plays, the Cowboys defense, which was struggling to make tackles in past weeks, made a couple very timely tackles. I think about third down near the end zone on the far side of the field, right around the 3 or 4 yard line, where that play was drawn up very well. Just a great play by Overshawn to make that tackle. There was a lot of opportunity, and I thought Jones navigated it well in this game. But I will say I agree with you, Gerard, in that deep throw not being there later in the game when they needed it. But otherwise, I thought he facilitated things pretty well. Gil says Dimes played well, which I agree with in this game. His receivers were terrible. Huge drops on third downs. That one later in the fourth quarter was massive. That looked like that was a ball that could have been caught too. Washington could be live for this division title, says Darius. I think the Washington hype's a little high right now. They've played 2 very bad defenses the last 2 weeks. They get another one this week. We'll see how that trends, but they're not going to continue playing at this offensive pace that they are, where they're literally not punting in 2 games in a row. There's been 0 punts the last 2 weeks. That's not a level any team is going to sustain. And it's not like they're blowing out opponents right now. They're just squeaking by because their defense is so bad, but this just incredible run of offense has really masked that. So I'm not ready to jump to this conclusion yet. I'm not disagreeing with you. They look great, and they look like a very dynamic offense at times, but it has been definitely schedule-lated to this point. So again, we could see another breakout this week because the Cardinals, right in that same class as the Giants and Bengals, who they have played in the last 2 weeks, maybe week 5, we start thinking about them a little bit differently too. So that would be my take on that. Tristan Paul says, got a ticket on Washington from draft day for division. Go Daniels. Okay, we've got some Washington Commanders sentiment being rooted for here in the group chat. So good to see folks coming back for another live reaction show. That'll wrap it up for me in this Thursday night football win for the Dallas Cowboys, 20-15. I will be back with each one of you, hopefully, if you're all awake and ready for it, tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 a.m. Pacific, with the final look and final market rundown for NFL week number 4 on the Simple Handicap podcast. Have a fantastic night, everybody. We'll chat to you again in the morning.